Hello, greetings. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you for your interest in spiritual matters. We're so glad that you're with us today as we continue to explore what we can learn about God and about faith in Jesus, from Jesus and from the Scriptures. My name's Ethan and I work with the Venice Church of Christ. We're disciples making disciples in Los Angeles. And we want to be of encouragement and service to you. Please let us know what you think about our conversation in the comments, subscribe to us, and if we can be of any service, reach out to us at VeniceChurchOfChrist.org. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Today, we're going to consider Moses. We understand the story of Moses is very important in the Bible. You've heard about Moses a lot, but what can we learn about him and the development of his character? That's going to be our consideration today. We're going to not be able to look at all the things that happened to Moses in every single detail. If we're going to do that, we'd be here for a very long time, because the entire story from Exodus chapter 2 until Deuteronomy 34 is all about Moses. And so we're going to look at what's going on in Moses' life at three specific moments and see who Moses is, what's been going on with Moses, and what we can learn from him. And we're going to begin in Exodus chapter 2 and in verse 15. When Pharaoh heard about this event, he sought to kill Moses. So Moses fled from Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian, and he settled by a certain well. From other parts of the story, we understand that Moses is around 40 years old at this point. And we believe that this is happening somewhere in the region of about 1485 BC. We have that date because if we take the numbers that are given in the Old Testament seriously, that the Exodus took place in 1 Kings chapter 6 and verse 1, about 480 years before Solomon's fifth year of reign, which if that was about 965, then the Exodus would have happened around 1445. There are many biblical scholars and Christians who believe that the numbering system in the Old Testament is sometimes more symbolic than actual, and believe that it is more likely that these events took place about 200 years later in the days of Ramses II, around the year maybe 1250 BC. Both sides have biblical evidence for their viewpoints. Both sides still affirm what the Scriptures teach. For our purposes, we're going to take that date of the given in this text seriously as actual dates, and it also helps set up this event, because the Pharaoh who would have heard about this and who would have been angry about this would be Pharaoh Thutmose II. Or perhaps maybe even Hatshepsut, his wife, but probably that's the time period that we're looking at. And that means that Moses would have been born someday around the life of Amenhotep I. This is a very important time in Egyptian history, because what's gone on in Egypt is that for 100 years, from about 1650 to 1550 BC, there were these invaders from the north whom they called the Hyksos, the shepherd kings, these people from the land of Canaan who were ruling over lower or northern areas of Egypt, around the Delta and into Middle Egypt. And this was a humiliating thing for the native Egyptians. The southern dynasty, the 17th dynasty in Thebes, was very significantly able to defeat both the invaders to the north, while also checking and defeating the Nubians to their south, that had also grown in prominence and stature. And this was taking place around 1550 with Ahmose I, and Ahmose's son is Amenhotep I, in this time that Moses would have been born. And the reason why that's so important for us is that we have seen in this Exodus narrative that a Pharaoh has arisen who did not know Joseph. And of course, you think about the fact that the Egyptians have just gone through this huge war and have had to reconquer the northern lands. And beyond that, Amenhotep I's successor king, Thutmose I, would grow an empire and develop an empire that would extend all the way up into the Levant to Carchemish and all the way down to the fourth cataract of the Nile River, the largest empire that Egypt would ever maintain. This was something that kings in the Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom didn't feel like they needed to do. Thutmose felt like he needed to do that because the sovereignty and dignity of Egypt had been compromised, and he did not want to see another part of Egypt overrun by an invader. So you can imagine in that environment, all of a sudden, in this prime land in the northeastern part of the Delta part of the Nile River, the Egyptians have this group of Hebrews who speak a Canaanite dialect right there in their land. Very easily could become a kind of a fifth column there that could undermine their rule. And that is why they enslaved them. But they kept growing in number, right? And that caused them great distress. And therefore, they made the rule that a female child could live, but male children would need to be killed. And the Hebrew midwives were not willing to follow that rule. And so the Egyptians had to take it on for themselves. And it's in that context that Amram and Jochebed, who are descendants of Levi, have a beautiful baby boy. And when he got to the age he could not be hidden anymore, they put him in that basket and let him down the river. And Pharaoh's daughter found him and had compassion on him and brought him into her house and named him Moses. So Moses now is being raised in Pharaoh's house. We are told in Acts 7 that Moses was raised to learn all the knowledge and understanding of the Egyptians. Moses is now in a really good place. Moses is in the house of Pharaoh. If he stays there, he has a likely very high administrative position, and who knows, maybe even could have been king himself with all the discord in the house with the death of Thutmose I and Thutmose II. Who knows? But Moses never forgets who he is. And what ends up happening is one day he goes and he sees one of his people being wronged by an Egyptian, and he kills that Egyptian. And the next day he realizes that's been known. That's the thing Pharaoh finds out and wants to kill Moses, and why Moses now is in exile. Because he remembered who he was, and as the Hebrews author would say, he did not choose to stay in the pleasures of Egypt. Instead, he chose the suffering of the people of God and the heritage of God. And because of that, would be blessed by God. So look at what Moses has done here. This takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength. Moses has only ever really known comfort and stability at the highest levels of the Egyptian society. But now he's in exile. He's in exile from exiles. The Israelites are in exile in Egypt, and he's exiled from them now in Midian. He's gone from living in a comfortable palace, and now he is living among shepherds. That's what Moses was willing to do in order to identify with God's people. And the question comes to us, would we be willing to do that? Would we be willing to give up our stability, everything we know, not just the sensual pleasures of the world, but the comfort and stability that the world would pretend to offer us? Would we give that up in order to identify the people of God in their suffering and their humiliation? That's something for us really to think about. So let's look at Moses again. In time, not a long time later, but a whole lot's happened in the between. We're going to go to Exodus, the 32nd chapter, in order to see Moses again. And there's a lot that's happened to Moses in the meantime. It's been 40 years since we last saw him. He's now 80 years old. The Pharaoh is Thutmose III, who is the greatest military pharaoh of all Egyptian history. And we believe that that is the Pharaoh that Moses resisted, and that the plagues came upon. And it's Thutmose's great army that was led out against the Israelites, and which perished in the Red Sea. But Moses was not a very willing leader. We can read in Exodus 3, 4, 5 all the arguments that he has with God, where he's really trying to escape this call that God has given him to deliver the Israelites from Egypt and with a strong and mighty hand through the work that Yahweh was going to do. So he is a very unwilling leader. Yes, he's meek and humble, but he goes beyond that in his lack of desire to lead. But even though he hasn't wanted to do it, he is now doing it. And in Exodus 32, he has led them throughout the plagues, and in the Passover, in crossing the Red Sea, all their complaints leading to Sinai. He has been on Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights, receiving Torah, receiving that instruction. In fact, God has just made for him the 2 tablets of stone on which are written the 10 Commandments by the finger of God. And the Israelites don't know what happened to him. They assume he's gone. They're leaderless. And they have Aaron make for them golden calves. The golden calf. Behold your gods who led you out of Egypt, Aaron says. And they feast, and they dance, and they play, and Yahweh is greatly angered. And Moses sees the great anger of God. And God, in fact, will say that, look, they have sinned a great sin. Let me destroy them in my anger that I can make of you a great nation. So imagine where Moses is at now. Moses is standing up here before God. God is very angry with the people. The people have definitely sinned. Moses has no way to excuse that. And Moses has a lot to gain here. All the people of God could be from him. But what does Moses say and do in this context? In Exodus chapter 32, beginning in verse 11, he says, "O Yahweh, why does your anger burn against your people, whom you have brought out from the land of Egypt with a great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, for evil he led them out to kill them in the mountains and to destroy them from the face of the earth? Turn from your burning anger and relent of this evil against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel your servants, to whom you swore by yourself and told them, I will multiply your descendants like the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have spoken about I will give to your descendants, and they will inherit it forever." This is an incredible, incredible moment, because Moses stands in the gap between Yahweh and his people. Yahweh is burning mad because of their transgressions. And yet Moses is willing to stand there before God and remind God about who he is and what he has promised. What will the Egyptians say? They're going to say that you led them out for evil to destroy them. Remember what you promised Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Did the people deserve Moses' intercession? Absolutely not. They had sinned. Is this what you would expect out of Moses? I mean, Moses, if he says nothing, the people became known as the Moshites, if we want to call them that, right? They're not going to be the Israelites any longer. So he is doing this at his personal disadvantage. And this is Moses, the shepherd of God's people, at his best. This is Moses, the one who stood before God for the people, at his best. And this is a great example for us of leadership at its best, where Moses here is willing to stand before God for a people who don't deserve it. How many of us would prove willing to stand before God and beg for him to relent of his anger when he's angry at people for their sin, and quite frankly, the people deserve to have the anger of God at them because of all they have done? Who among us would have the confidence in our faith to be willing to stand before God and to ask for him to relent of his anger when his anger is being ready to be poured out? It's an incredible situation here. An incredible thing that Moses has done. An incredible example of leadership for us as God's people to think about, and we can really see the growth and character of Moses. He didn't want to do this, but now that he's doing it, he is doing it to the full, even to his own disadvantage. We can see why the text says Moses is a very meek and humble man, and that why Moses was adored by Israel for generations afterward. But now we're going to go in time a little bit in Numbers chapter 20. And we find Moses in a very difficult moment. It's been 40 years since we last saw Moses, and it wasn't supposed to be this way. When he signed up for this, he was going to lead the people in the promised land, and it wasn't going to take this long. But the people persistently rebelled against God, persistently grumbled and complained against Moses. And now God has punished and condemned that entire generation to die in the wilderness. It's now 40 years later, and the time has come to start going toward the promised land. But it's been a hard 40 years for Moses, and it hasn't gotten much better recently. Even his own brother and sister had turned against him and complained and grumbled about him. And now his sister, the sister who he maybe had come to loggerheads with for a moment, but had been his protector at the beginning, she has now died. And now yet again at the waters of Meribah, the people complain that there's no water. There's nothing again. They're complaining and grumbling again. And so Moses goes and bows before God, and God tells them to go and to speak to the rock, and the water will come out. But Moses is done. And Moses gathers the community in Numbers 20 and verse 10 and says to them, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring water out of this rock for you?" Then Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his staff. And water came out abundantly, and the community drank, and their animals drank too. Now we could sit here and argue, is it because Moses struck the rock when he was supposed to speak to it? Was it because he said, we must give water from you, when it was really God who was doing the work? But the real issue is behind it, both of those. And that's that Moses is exasperated and frustrated. He's in a really bad place. And he pours that out against the people. And what does God say to him? Because you did not trust me enough to show me as holy before the Israelites, therefore you will not bring this community into the land that I have given them. This is Moses' great transgression. This is Moses' sin. And he will suffer for it. He will soon lead the people up to the plains of Moab. He will be able to stand upon Mount Nebo, and he will see all the land that Israel will receive. But he will die there. He is so close, and yet he is so far away. We can make a lot out of Moses' transgression. It's a reminder that he is human like the rest of us, that he is very meek, that he is the embodiment of the lawgiver and the law, right? The law for the rest of the time will be known as the law of Moses. And Moses is the embodiment of the law as the lawgiver. That's why Moses is going to meet with Jesus in the Transfiguration as the embodiment of the law to comfort him regarding what Jesus would endure. But Moses has gone wrong here because he's lost his patience with the people. It's not that we can't understand, right? It is extremely understandable why his patience would break, but it doesn't excuse that it broke. And he presumed a little too much. He showed his anger and his frustration. He did not demonstrate the holiness of God, and because of that, he would not enter the promised land. And that's a reminder and warning for us as well. We see Moses at his best as a leader. We also see him at his worst. And Moses at his worst is a reminder that people will frustrate us. People will really exasperate us. And our temptation is going to be to lose it and to blow off steam and to express that anger. But God is not glorified in that. God is not made holy in that. We are called to be long-suffering toward one another. And part of long-suffering is being suffering, to endure that frustration a little bit longer than we're willing to hold on to it. Imagine if Moses had been able to do that at Meribah. We need to think about that as well ourselves. And that's when we see the life and character of Moses. Moses was able to do such glorious things. He saw the face of God. His face shone because he saw the face of God. He saw the back of God passing by. He delivered the law to Israel. He would be forever remembered as a faithful servant in God's house. And let us therefore also be faithful servants of God in Christ, being willing to stand up just like Moses did for God and his people, being willing to be the shepherd or to be that person who stands in the gap and to advocate for people who may not deserve it before a God who is righteously indignant. And let us maintain our strength and to endure and to be willing to suffer the exasperation and frustration that we will face without responding in kind. Let us be found faithful in God's house like Moses was. We're again so glad that you've joined us. Love to hear your thoughts about Moses, what your comments are about what we talked about, some other things you want to talk about with Moses. Please let us know in the comments, subscribe to us, and if we can be of any service, reach out to us at VeniceChurchOfChrist.org. And may the Lord bless and keep until we're able to meet again.